I'm Sadaf, and welcome to this webinar that we're doing for working mothers. Um, and I have today with me Annabella, and I'll call her Bella all throughout this 1 hour, so it should work. So a bit about why are we here, and a bit about our background, so that it serves a reminder that what gives us the right to talk about it itself. So in my case, if you guys don't know, I'm an executive coach, and I help introverted leaders to feel comfortable in their own skin and not burn out in the process of their leadership roles. And my company is called Quiet Thrivers. And we have Bella over here, who I got the opportunity to meet during our coaching accreditation process. And I'm glad I connected with her, and she's always been there reaching out whenever she could hear a bit of distress in my voice related to childcare itself. Bella is also an executive coach, and she has started this company by the name of Balanced Coaching. She's a career coach for mothers. And the idea that she has in her company is that she helps moms with kids, with young kids essentially, who feel stuck, are feeling unhappy, or lack a bit of clarity on what are their options, how to move on, and what type of next steps are there for them. So Bella is there to give clarity or help you get that clarity. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
So, Bella, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect. So, um, there's some bit of research I did before I dived into the topic. And the topic, just as a reminder for everyone, is we're talking about how to redefine balance for moms.
Mm.
And I think this could be relevant for fathers as well, but let's focus on moms for the time being. And we're trying to figure out how do they balance their homes and their careers at the same time. Are we Is balance even the right word? I don't know. Is balance a realistic thing? I don't know. I think it's a never ending discussion and topic, and we'll try to explore it over here. But I'm very confident that Bella is going to give us some insights on how hard should we be on ourselves in this case. Um, so I'll give a bit of context. As I was going through this research that was done on working mothers um, some time ago, and there's a lady by the name of uh, Lucia Garcia Lorenzo, and she's from the Department of Psychological and Behavioral Sciences from LSE over here in London. And she kind of covered 80 moms across the globe, and they were trying to understand the struggle between identities,
Mm.
between being a mother and being a professional itself. And what I liked about is that, we usually think about how do I balance between being a mom and a professional. We don't use the word identity. It is an identity related tension, is what I've understood from them. And I'll just read something out, Bella, and I would love to hear your initial reaction to it. And what do you think? How do we get over this tension? She says that if you put your identity as a mother first, then your career suffers. Or if you focus too much on your career, then you may have to outsource care for your children. That tension is never fully resolved. So, reactions, Bella, over to you.
It's so true, isn't it? You're judged no matter what you do as a mother. I think you can't win. So my personal perspective and kind of like my story from why I became a coach and why I
Yeah.
now specifically target working mothers is because ultimately, like I said, you can't win. You're judged regardless. You're judged if you're a stay-at-home mom. You're judged if you put your career first. So the way you win in your career in your life is if you doing something that actually makes you happy. So you
Mm,
align your choices with your values and your priorities. Um, and I think that's the key part, and that's what I help. That's what I try and help other women, because that's basically how I came into this path. Is I figured out what was right for me, and then I think you do kind of overcome the judgment, because it doesn't matter what other people think when you're doing what's right for you, your circumstance, and your family.
Hmm. Hmm. And when you say this, I like this. I think this is a good hack. Maybe it's easier said than done, but if you find something that you're passionate about, then there is some resolution to it.
Mm.
Now, the question is obviously, how do we get to that stage where we're able to find the courage to pursue the passion, because that's also not too straightforward. Um, Tell me a bit about yourself in terms of how did you um, take that step? What got you to take that step that I want to go after my passion?
It's ironic, but it's coaching, and it's I think every coach. I think, oh yeah, I would say every coach has probably become a coach because they've had coaching and they've realized the value it has. And then, if
Mm,
coaching becomes what they want to do, they want to help others have the same value that they've got out of it. So for me, it was the coaching process.
mm,
Um, and that's what helped me align. Well, actually, is to take a step back too. I went through coaching after I'd had my first child,
mm,
and it was because I didn't this isn't why I had the coaching, but I didn't realize that you are a different person after you have a baby.
mm,
You think you'll be the exact same person going back into the
mm,
working field, you just have a child. Like, it's just,
mm,
that's
mm,
just another part of you, but
mm,
it's not, is it? It's you are actually a completely different person. And some people's values, priorities, and all of that change drastically. Some people's might, judge, might tweak a little bit, but in my case, they changed a lot, but I
mm.
didn't realize.
Yeah,
So there is that tension, because you are trying to be the person who you used to be before having kids, but you're also not that person. And then it comes with the mental load of
yeah,
having having a child, which is huge. And I don't think, for me especially, I don't think I realized that the mental load actually existed until I went through the coaching process. I'd had executive coaching myself, and it was within that process that my coach, who was brilliant, was helped me realize that, one, the mental load is real. So I felt
mm,
so seen. I was like, oh, that's what I'm feeling. And then it helped me work out what my new priorities and my new values were, so that I could then make decisions about my career and my family life that ultimately suited me better, and my new, the way, like, my new life, I guess, my new being.
mm, mm. I want to pick up on the values part, because I think we underestimate this a lot.
Mm.
Because usually, when we're in the corporate world, we get a bit cynical when we go through that exercise of identifying your values, and you're like, what do I do with it? um, Fine, integrity and success and family, those are my values. But what we don't do is, which again, along with you, I discovered that how we have to protect our values and how do we have to turn them into principles so that we can stand by them. And I think we also forget that this identity change that we go through, we underestimate it a lot as mothers.
Yeah.
And in that moment of, I wouldn't want to use the word crisis, um, but there's some, it's you, when you hit that realization that I'm somebody else,
Mm.
there is a mental crisis that you go through. It's a reality, because you thought you'll be someone else when
Yeah.
you'll be a mother. Then the values really help you.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment, whether it is becoming a mother or some big juncture in your life, we have to sit and relook at the values to kind of get out of that tension, anxiety moment. So I can see why you were able to successfully make that transition, because you kind of went to the foundation of the values itself. Now, what did you discover about yourself um, as a working woman when you became a mom?
Uh, so I did that. I discovered the first thing that, well, the biggest discovery was that my values and my priorities had changed, had shifted. So you mentioned about having that crisis when you realize your identity is kind of changed, and that's, that's that kind of like is the tip of the iceberg, because what most people don't actually know, obviously everyone knows that a woman's body changes when you have a
Mm.
baby, and we've all heard the jokes about the hormonal changes that you go through when you're pregnant
Yeah,
as well, and postpartum. But what people don't realize is that your brain actually physically changes shape when
yeah.
you're pregnant, and for at least like 2 years afterwards.
Mm, mm,
It changes shape, it builds new connections, it
mm.
rewires itself ultimately so that you can be the best protector for this new baby that this new life you've created. But you change in so many more ways than just the shape of your body, and I think it's that understanding that people don't they don't realize, which is why I think for me it was like almost like naivety. I would just be the exact same person with a child. But I was thinking about this obviously before our chat, and you go from being on maternity leave where you're thinking about your child 24/7. You're thinking about how much food have they
Yeah,
pooped,
yeah.
have
Most
they
important.
yeah, like have they yeah, are they hitting their developmental milestones? Should I be doing more in order to help them achieve those? You are, you could write a thesis with the amount of research that you're doing in terms of like learning about how to, keep them alive and give them the
Yeah,
best chance at life and all of that. It's a huge undertaking, isn't it, to parent a child? And then after maternity leave, you go back to work. That doesn't change. You're not then stop. You don't stop thinking about your child 24
yeah,
7, and
yeah.
do I have enough nappies, and are they going to settle at nursery, and are they going to get sick? Am I going to get a call like that? If anything, it just gets more and more as the years go on. I don't think it ever gets easier. And then especially if you throw more kids in the mix, it just doubles. It
Of
doubles it,
course.
doesn't
Doubles. And yes, I never thought that I would be so obsessed with somebody's pooping schedule.
it? I
Never,
know, right?
never thought. And yeah, when mothers get together, they love talking about it, which is so weird.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's
definitely
crazy.
one of those realizations as parents. You're like, oh, I know about my friends' kids' pooping schedules and all sorts. Like, why?
I,
Um,
this part that you're talking about, that it continues, I love that you said it, because apparently it took London School of Economics some research to get to that conclusion, because they said the same.
mm,
When it comes into the context of corporations and companies supporting mothers, um, they sometimes tend to think of motherhood as linear.
mm,
um, Maternity leave, it ends, she comes back to work,
everything's back to normal. Exactly.
right? Whereas the other narrative, which is more practical and logical, is that it is a continuous thing, it never ends, it does not end, it's the new normal.
Yeah.
And that is where organizations tend to sometimes get it wrong, or they just don't know what else can they do now
Yeah.
to support. And in your case, I want to hear from you as well, Annabella, that do you think companies are winning when it comes to supporting new moms?
Some companies are doing really well, but I would say most no. Um, but not necessarily at the fault of the company. I think it's
Mm,
the conversations are being had and it's moving in the right direction, but there's so much more we can do. And again, from my perspective, going back into the workforce after having my first son, that I am also partly to blame with that transition, because I didn't have the awareness that I needed the support. So I wasn't able to communicate that. So the company can't help someone
true,
if they're not communicating what they need. I assumed I would
true.
be the exact same person. So, and I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of that in most organizations. They're putting, they're saying the right things, they're saying that they, they're supportive, but if they don't have the awareness and the mother themselves doesn't have the awareness, then you're not, there's not going to be that support that you need. But then there are companies that are becoming more aware, and the women now, I think, are becoming more aware of, the whole transition into motherhood, and the mental load and the flexibility that we need in order to thrive in our jobs as well as at home. So I think there's conversations are moving in the right direction, but I would say we're still so far away from where where we need to go.
Mm. Mm. And I before becoming a mother myself, um, I now reflect on how I used to judge new mothers when they would come back to work.
Yeah.
And I feel very disappointed about my perception of them. Um, because I would notice a pattern. They would come back, and they would come back with full force,
Mm,
to the point of being overly ambitious and overly eager to compensate for the, according to them, time lost. Yeah.
yeah.
And in some cases, to the extent that they, without realizing, they'll try to railroad the non mothers in the process as well, because they really want to get ahead quickly.
Mm,
And we would judge them when I was not a mother, that what's happening, like why. And that's where it is, we get it so wrong, because it's not just about the mother coming back. Yes, it starts off with her awareness. When she says I need support, it has to be very clear on what type of support will work for her. And I think coaching with you would help people to even figure out what type of support do they need. And
mm,
then the people in their team, we are not given any awareness in organization. They listen, this team member is going to come back, these are the set of behaviors we will need to support them in these areas. So we don't do that. And organizations, in some cases, they just sometimes focus on maybe the mother, and maybe the direct boss, but not the extended team, in terms of raising awareness. um, Now, I want to be the devil's advocate in this conversation. Um, what do you think? How should an organization react in this? Because the reality is that the mom is out for 1 year, in
mm,
case of UK at least, yeah, or in other parts of the world as well, where maternity leave is only increasing in duration. Um, she's out, she comes back. The reality is that yes, 1 year or even 1.5 or 2 years, um, she has lost out on some projects, growth opportunities, and whatnot. Um, Now, technically speaking, her clock stopped when her maternity leave started, and now it restarts again. Now,
mm.
during that 1 year, a lot of things must have happened in the company. Do you think it is fair for the mother to come back, the professional woman to come back and say, forget about that 1 year, assume I did everything, and compensate me and make me grow at the same pace? Is it fair for the organization to resolve for this tension?
Uh, what do you mean? So do you mean in terms of them just like picking up where they left off, or are you
Yes.
saying that they need time to be able to settle back in?
Where they left off. Is it fair, do you think, that to assume that if, for example, there is one colleague of yours or a peer who didn't go on maternity leave, grew,
Mhm.
did some work, maybe is ready for a promotion, but you come back after a year and you want to get evaluated the same way as that peer of yours?
Mm. I think it depends on the person, the company, but also that transition period. So you've got kit days, keeping in touch days, for example, that you can
Mm,
use on your maternity leave, which I think you get 10. And it
mm,
basically, they're days that you can come back into the office ahead of you going back to work to make sure that you are trained in everything you need to be trained in. You're up to speed with everything that's gone on in the past year. You've got time to go through your emails so that you're coming when you're on your first day
mm,
back. Everything is clear and as it should be.
mm,
So I think if you're making the most of those sorts of situations, and the company is supporting you to make sure that you're not missing out on um, key policy changes. I know you're not legally allowed. The company's not legally allowed to message you work related things, but if it's a key change in the organization, I think there's probably
mm,
some rules about what you can and can't know. Um, and then I would argue that you learn a lot more skills, or a lot of extra skills while you're on maternity leave
mm,
through that
mm,
transition, because of becoming a mother, but also just childcare and everything, that you're developing more skills. So you're becoming a different person as it is, but not
mm.
a lesser person. And then again, once you've then joined back, it's not like you've had it's not like you've lost your brain. It's like riding a bike, isn't it? Ultimately, you'll pick things
True.
back up really quickly, and with the right support, it would, you would just hit the ground running again. It would be like you've never left. So like that, I think every mother that's returned to work after maternity leave has said that. You said those exact words, like it's like I've never left.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so so yes, um I think it depends again, the person, the career, the situation, the circumstance, all of that. But I think it would be absolutely fair for someone to be given the exact same chance if they felt like they were ready for it, and they could prove
Mm.
that they could prove that they were, and that it's something that they wanted.
Hmm, hmm. That's so important because when you're coming back from your maternity leave, I think this level of self awareness is really important. That hey, you did not lose your brain.
Mm,
I think it's important that you say it this way, and not just that you are the same person in terms of competency, but you're also have picked up new things and new skills. And I think that type of a conversation is so important to have with yourself, or it's so important to reach out and get that perspective if you don't have that perspective in your mind. Because women also have the issue of, keep questioning, do I deserve this?
yeah.
Is it fair, right? I don't want to use the word imposter syndrome because it's been used to okay. But I think it's important to have that awareness of you did it till that point, you were doing something super important in terms of taking care of a human, learning a new side of yourself, and all of that could be brought back into the organization itself. And there's this lady by the name of sorry, Carol Gilligan, and she wrote this called something called Ethics of Care,
Mm,
and it's essentially a perspective from that how female leadership skills are so important in the organization now, um, and simply because women bring in more balance,
mm,
which I find so interesting, that here we're trying to figure out how to redefine balance. And actually, because we become mothers or we care for somebody, um, then we automatically know how to balance things out, and we're good at it, and we can bring those things into the organization. And then she also mentions that women, they're able to make hence better connections and empower others.
mm.
And all these aspects, I think, they're undervalued. When you come back, you feel everything is the same. And these are the new skills that we pick up, which we don't have before, in some
Yeah.
cases, right? um, and I want to hear from you. There's a lot of conversation around, in some cases, when women, do come back into the organization, after maternity leave, um, them seeking out help to take care of their children, the guilt is there. It doesn't go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. In some cases, maybe you will feel less guilt because maybe the grandparents can take care of the child. So, but in some cases, it's not an option, so you might need external help or care or daycare or whatnot. You leave them there at 8 a.m., you pick them up at 6 p.m., the whole day is gone, and you just come, food, diaper change, bath, bye bye. Yeah. And the whole day starts again. It's very hard. um,
Mm.
and obviously the mom has to take most of the brunt of it. How do you, Annabella, how do you reconcile it, in with yourself? Or how would you suggest, how should women reconcile it in their minds?
So, from my experience, because I went through the coaching process, I figured out that my values had changed, my priorities had changed. And then I reevaluated my life, my career, and how I want to parent. I made decisions about my what I wanted to do in my
Hmm.
career that meant that the place I'm at now in terms of childcare versus time with my family suits me perfectly. So that mom guilt for me has honestly just disappeared because I'm doing what makes me happy, what keeps me fulfilled. So it makes me it's the right thing for me and my family. But and that looks different to everyone, right? So it will come with and I guess I'm fortunate that I've been able to make it work. And it does come with compromises. Like you're not going to be able to, in most cases these days you need a dual income in order to
Yeah.
survive. So if someone was like, I don't want to go back to work, but actually they needed to, that is slightly, it is slightly different, and that mom guilt does kind of, it will creep in. But I think ultimately, if you're making decisions that align to what's important to you, then that mom guilt is not as it's not as front of mind, because you're doing what makes you happy, and what makes you happy will ultimately make you more motivated and successful in your career, but also make you more engaged as a parent, and you feel like you're more present as a parent as well.
Hmm.
um so that's how I would reframe it. But there'll always be instances where, yeah, where you feel guilty for doing one thing or the other, and you feel like you could do better. um and then from that perspective, I would just say it's about communication. It's making sure that that is communicated. Like my first when I first went back to work, literally the first it must have been either the first week or the second week of me starting a new job after going back to work, and my son fell really ill. So he was going
Hmm.
to nursery, but he had a chest infection,
Hmm.
really bad chest infection, so he couldn't go to nursery. But it
Hmm.
was my first it was like my first week or two in the company, and I felt like I couldn't
Hmm.
call them up and say, I'm really sorry, but I need to look after him. So I had to use my mother-in-law, who lives locally, to say, can you please look after him? But that guilt ate me up, because I didn't feel like I could have that conversation with my company. So I think from that
Hmm.
perspective, it's that communication to say, this is this is the reality of being a working mom. um and it's something, then it's about basing your decisions about your priorities. So at that point, I didn't know what my priorities were necessarily, and
Hmm.
I picked career over family. In hindsight, for me, that wasn't the right choice, but I didn't have the tools or the
Hmm.
confidence to be able to have that conversation. So I think there'll always be instances where, hindsight is uh, just something that happens, isn't it? You're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I could have done that better. um but yeah, that's how I would reframe mum guilt.
Mm-hmm. And when your clients come in, what are is there some sort of a theme that you pick up on the usual conversations that you see coming from working mothers?
It's all, yeah, so it's always about the juggle. Tends to always be the mental load, the juggle of being able to be successful at both, and is that even a pot, like is that even possible? And
Mm,
you touched on that at the beginning about balance, and is it, is balance a possibility? And my take on that is that it's not. Balance isn't 50-50. It's not about being able to split your
yeah,
time 50-50 work,
yeah.
career, family. It's about so the analogy I like to give to all my clients is it's a juggle. So it is a juggle, but if you find the right balance within that juggle, then all the balls
Mm,
will stay in the air. But how I like to think of it is, you have glass balls and you have plastic balls. So your
mm,
glass balls, when you're juggling, are the really important parts of your life. So, from a career perspective, that might be attending a board meeting, or attending the strategy days, or being involved in like the key decisions. And then from a family perspective, it might be attending your kids' school plays, or whatever it might be. What's most important to you, those are your glass balls. Then your
mm,
plastic balls are that they're still important to you, but they're not as high on the priority list. So
mm, mm,
it could be pickup, just being there to be able to pick your kid up from school,
mm,
rather than a nanny, or rather than um, a family member, or whatever it is. And then you're from a work perspective, it could just be, doing the small reports, or doing the one-to-one meetings, whatever it might be. So when you're juggling, you don't want the glass balls to drop, because if you drop a glass ball, it shatters.
mm,
Whereas if you drop a plastic ball, it bounces right back up. So in the
mm,
moment when life throws, a curveball at you, and you think, oh crap, I can't actually keep these balls in the air, you drop the plastic ones, you don't drop the glass ones. And then that's how you'll be able to find that balance that makes you feel like you are still succeeding in your career and your family life, because you're not dropping the things that are most important to you, which then spirals into mum guilt, and spirals into the feeling of not worthy, or not being motivated because you're not feeling like you're achieving at work, or you don't feel like you're present enough for your child. So
mm,
it's about figuring out, and this will be look different to everyone, and it will equally change for you over time. It won't always be the exact same glass and plastic balls. So it's always
mm,
important to reevaluate that. But it is important to figure out what those are at any one given time, so that when something does happen that's out of your control, you know which balls you can drop, because they'll bounce back up, and then life will continue on.
mm. I think that's such a good way to relook at priorities, because usually when we look at priorities, the dimension might be in some other way of prioritizing, either in terms of personal impact or time or importance or urgency.
Mhm.
But I like this addition of thinking about the how fragile is it. I think that's also important, and that gives a good context of adding a dimension of not just importance, but in terms of if it falls, then what.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to kind of relook at your priorities and your reprioritization method. And I guess
Yeah.
the other part which sounds super critical in this is it's not just a one-time exercise. You have to keep on relooking at it.
Yeah.
Um, um, of course, what we end up doing as people is that we look at these things when the crisis has already hit us. So,
It's too
so
late at that point.
yeah, it's too late, or we're in the wrong state of mind.
Yeah.
But in this case, what you're saying is, I guess, even do it when you're in the right frame of mind,
Mm.
um, right? Um, to keep looking at the priorities. But from companies and organizations' point of view, um, obviously, in some cases, I think we're lucky in UK that we get that kind of support system
Mm.
from the company. There is legal protection. Then in some cases, companies go above and beyond um, to do that. But I think UK is an exception. Um, so many countries, yeah, they don't. They're nowhere close to it. Sadly, recent conversations in UK as well have been around maybe uh, maternity leave pay is a bit too much. There have been these recent conversations I saw, which was a bit disappointing, but I think people will shut it down pretty quickly. Um, but but other countries where the struggle is there, I guess what they grapple with, and if I look at the developing world, a bit of their perspective is already there are very few women in these organizations, and then you add in the layer of becoming a working mother that adds to complexity from the perspective of the organization, that what do we do now. um, in those situations where you might not have the legal framework protecting you, where it is the organization that has to do what it has to do, um, what do you think are some of the things a mother that's going to rejoin the workplace, how should she be seeking support from an organization that might not be fully aware, or is sitting in a country where the legal framework doesn't exist?
I think it first comes down to the mother herself initially to figure out what's a possibility for her, what works for her. So as a working mother, you'll need flexibility at some point because you'll get that nursery call to say your child is sick and they can't. They've got a snotty nose and they can't come into nursery. Like, what do you mean? Um, so it's figuring out what they actually need. So it's being self-aware in terms of how they've changed, what their priorities are,
Hmm.
but then also what their needs are in order to be able to succeed. So
Hmm.
because you need flexibility, because you might need flexibility, does not mean that you'll be any less effective at your job.
Hmm.
And I think that's the bias that kind of come goes hand in hand. Is if you have to leave early to pick up your kids, you get a call and you've got to go pick up them from nursery, people just think, oh well, you're not working as hard or you're not doing as
Hmm.
good of a job, and that's not the case at all. um, so I think it's figuring out what your needs are in all sorts of circumstances, like your ideal day to day, but also the ad hoc, out of control moments,
Hmm.
um, and then communicating that with your organization. And then it depends on the organization, depends on the country, I guess, and it depends on the um, the budget, I guess, of what the company can afford. But there's parental transition coaching available, which is specifically designed to help
Hmm.
mothers be prepared to go on to maternity leave. So like leaving in a place that they know
Hmm.
everything's going to be working um, as it should be, I guess, while they're
Hmm.
off, and then helping them transition back into the workforce. And like you said, they'll work with the mother, but also with their line manager, so that the line manager knows how to support them. There probably could be more work done to help with the wider team as well. But there's options out there from that perspective to help support working women returning back to the workforce.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, it does depend. It does depend on the company, doesn't it, ultimately, and the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah. Now, one thing I also kind of want to ask you is, when we say support, um, sometimes the mothers are not clear what type of support do they even need, right? I guess it has to do with flexibility, maybe in some cases support for childcare. Um, what else do you think is the type of support the working mother should be asking for
What, from an organization or just in general?
from the organization?
I'd say clear objectives in terms of what they're supposed to be achieving, because again, because you need that flexibility doesn't mean that you're going to be any less effective at your job. But if the
Hmm.
objectives that you're working towards are unclear, then it is hard to measure how that flexibility may or may not be impacting you. So I think
Hmm.
having really clear objectives and what you're expected to achieve, and I don't just mean tasks due by X dates, I mean like overall objectives, like what ultimately are you in this role to achieve. Some companies I think do it really well, other companies don't. So I think it's being super clear on that, being realistic in terms of the hours that the mother might work. So I would say the biggest like can't think of the word, but like most people when they're working a full-time week, you have a set, say it's 40 hours or whatever it might be that you work per week. You always do more than that. You
Yeah, yeah,
always end up doing more hours than you should.
yeah.
Um, and that becomes increasingly more difficult when you do have to be home for bedtime
Hmm.
to do the bedtime routine, put them down. And then by that point, um, you might be a bit brain dead. You might be thinking, actually, I don't have the capacity to pick up my laptop and
Yeah.
continue working. So it's being realistic of what's actually achievable within your working hours, your paid working hours. And obviously, every business is different. There'll be peaks and troughs. And so you might need to, actually, find the courage to pick up that laptop and work extra hours when it's a super busy period. But the main thing is that it's not continuous.
Hmm.
It's not like a long term thing. And if that works for you and that's what you want to do, then that's also absolutely fine. But if it doesn't, then it is having that
Hmm.
clear communication of what's realistic
Hmm.
um, in your paid hours. And I've always said to people I've managed as well that working longer hours is not, for me, it's not seen as a positive, because to
Yeah.
me it makes you look like you're either inefficient at your job, you've got poor timekeeping, or you have too much on your plate. And if
Yeah.
that's the case, then that's a conversation that needs to be
Hmm.
had in terms of the team growth and
Hmm.
expanding the team or delegating to different people and
Hmm.
looking at the workload split and so on. So I think it's that same sort of perspective for working mothers, is what's realistic, and do you need more support in being more efficient or having better time
Hmm.
management or whatever, prioritization or whatever it might be, and then supporting them with that. But if not, it's what's realistic within those times. And then from an objective perspective, so that when you are then working, you are very clear on what needs to get done in that time. So if
Hmm.
you get that call from nursery, you're still working to that same
Yeah.
objective in the same amount of hours that you would in that week anyway. It just
Hmm.
looks slightly different. You just have the break in the middle because your kid is sick or you have to pick up from school. But ultimately, the
Hmm.
job is still getting done and still getting done to a high degree. So, um, yeah, those, other than the what's you've mentioned as well, I think those would be the key things.
One bit that comes to my mind is, besides the support and how we should relook at objectives, I think we need to relook at the way we focus on our leadership skills as well when we come back to work. And by what do I mean by that is, in my mind, the two most important leadership skills that you should try to ace as a working mother is decision making and delegation. I think that those two are super critical.
Mm.
So I think if there is any gap in your leadership skill in that area, try to ace it when you come back from maternity leave.
What's
Um,
funny is I think that's also goes hand in hand with your family life as well, the decision making and the delegating. So if you've got a partner there to support you, being able to delegate some of that mental load and some of that, this the stuff that you as mothers tend to feel like you need to own, but actually, especially
mhm,
when you're both working parents, but it doesn't really matter what the
yeah.
work dynamic is. But yeah, it is that decision making and delegating. So it kind of goes hand in hand, leadership and being a mother, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and because I one aspect of you as a female leader that we underestimate is the impact of your lifestyle change. What impact it will have on the people who report into you.
Mm,
I think they get a bit neglected in the process. And if us as working mothers, we focus on developing the decision making and the empowerment delegation aspect. It's only going to benefit those folks who report into
Yeah.
you, because that's where the frustration lies with them usually, is either my boss isn't taking decisions on time, I'm trying to call her, she's with her kid, she's not deciding. That's the frustration usually.
Mm.
Or because you're, as a mom, maybe before going on maternity leave, you paused your clock and you restarted. So you kind of are holding on to things in the same fashion as before, in terms of who's going to do the work. Will it be you? Because the because you were visibly absent from the organization for 1 year, you want to have enough face time to compensate. And that's where sometimes the struggle comes, because you're like, but then I need to show my face, that I'm back. And
Mm.
that is something we tend to overdo. Maybe it's not
Yeah.
needed. In such cases, something that I tell my introverted coaches as well, try to, in those cases where visibility is not practical for you, either because it's your personality or your circumstances, push visibility via your team.
Mm.
The more they see your team performing, doing well, it's a rub off effect. So you don't have to kill yourself in the process of, I need to be more visible, they need to see me more and more and more. So the ladies out there and all those people who help working mothers to come back, I think these two skills, they need to be consciously, they need to be developed, because as a working as a mother, you accidentally get good at it, decision making and delegation. It's
Yeah.
accidental, right? We're not sitting going through a course or a session that I have to pick on those. But this could be planned. You could plan your return, in a solid way, instead of just popping in and saying I'm back and everything is back to normal.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. And again, it's that community, it's just communication is key, isn't it? And empowering your team as well to make like specific decisions or take on specific tasks, like you said, in terms of delegation, but that communication to ensure that they know where you are, what you're like, what's going to be feasible, when they can get in contact with you, for example.
yeah.
That's all that's needed, is when people, when they feel, they don't feel lost. They feel like they're still supported,
Mm.
regardless of your working hours, or if you do have to leave on an ad hoc basis, they still feel supported. And then they feel empowered, like you said, to do, like, make key decisions or make decisions without you, for example. And again, delegating, yeah, decision making, delegating, empowering, and communication, probably the four key things, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that's the cheat code, ladies. That's the cheat code. And I think the communication part, you're bang on over there, Bella, because one piece of communication that has to happen when you come back is to have a very honest conversation with your team and say things
Yeah.
are not the way they used to be. They're different now. And I think
Mm.
just saying it will make everybody realize it's not business as usual. It is going to be different, because she has changed. Things have changed. She's going to work differently, behave differently, and manage the team differently. And
Yeah.
it's super important to define what that different is,
Yeah.
um, so that everybody's super clear. So Bella, we're wrapping up. We're going towards the end. Anything you want to say about your coaching practice, or any other advice or watch outs for the working moms out there?
um I do actually have one last point to make, I'd say, is what I've learned through coaching multiple working mothers is that putting yourself first is actually one of the key things to being successful in your career and
Mm.
your home life. And it seems so counterintuitive, investing
Mm.
time for you and investing money in you, for example, into
Mm.
coaching, because you go, well, that's time is better spent with my kids, or doing that extra bit of work that I need to do, or whatever it might be. But actually, if you invest time in yourself, and I've also found this myself, that if I actually invest time in myself to do things that make me happy, whether it's socializing, time away from kids, or whatever it might be, um, I'm ultimately happier. I'll feel more motivated at work because I'll be less stressed. So therefore, I achieve more. I'm also then more present with my kids because I've had that break. I've had that mental
Yeah.
space so I can distance myself and actually have me time. So it's like a vicious circle if you don't give yourself time for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So that would be like my biggest piece of advice for all mothers is, yeah, time for yourself is just as important or equally more important um, than time with your kids or time with career, because it's like a positive cycle. If you're happy, they're happy, and it all fits into place from that point onwards.
Love it. I endorse it. And there are so many ladies out there who feel that self care is being selfish.
Mm,
Um, and it's so wrong because in order to be selfless for your kids, you have to have self care. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
yeah,
Um, and there's nothing selfish about it. If you really want to be fully present with your kids, you have to think about your mental, physical well being. It's not going to work otherwise.
absolutely.
It's not sustainable. You're not going to get some sort of a Nobel Peace Prize because you were 100% selfless. And there's nothing selfish about self care. I think
Exactly.
that's the reality of it. So great. Thank you so much, Bella,
Thanks for
uh,
having
for
me.
your time. And I'll close it on something I read, which was very controversial when it was said by Indra Nui, who was the ex Pepsi CEO. I have feelings about it. I don't know why I get a bit triggered by it, but I'll just read it out. She says that I don't think women can have it all. I just don't think so. We pretend we have it all. We pretend we can have it all. So, and it triggered a response because there was an idea of why? What do you mean we can't have it all? Yes, we can. So that it's a reality. It's a tension. It will remain there. And I love it when you said that this balance is not about 50-50.
Mm.
It's about juggling. So whoever is out there trying to achieve 50-50, you're going to fail. It's a circus. You have to
Mm.
juggle. That's the reality.
It is a circus.
And in this case, there are monkeys and
Yeah, and
we
flying poos. Yeah.
exactly. Yes, absolutely. And projectile vomit. So all those things. Yeah, but thank you so much. What I'll do is we are going to leave details of how to get in touch with Bella or to myself. It will be in the video and the chat, so anybody who wants to get in touch can do that. But thank you so much, Bella, and yeah, take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
So now I'll end recording.